Today we're going to talk about midpoint and distance. We're going to jump right in by finding the midpoint of a segment. I don't know if you've heard the word segment before, so let's just hurry and say that a segment is simply a small portion of a line. The number line is a great example of a line, given that it goes on in both directions forever, right? A segment, like I said, is simply a small portion of that. A segment has something that we call endpoints, basically a beginning point and an ending point, right? They're both called endpoints, however. And we're going to start by finding the midpoint of the segment that stretches between -4 and +2 on the number line. Now with such a small segment, it's really easy to count this out and actually find your very middle point. However, if you have a really long segment or a segment that's not on a number line, it's not always quite that simple. So there's got to be kind of an easier way. Now middle, what we've done before to find middle is used average, right? Average helps us find the mathematical middle. Well, finding the midpoint is no different. We're actually going to take the average of the two endpoints. So here's our official formula. The midpoint is equal to a plus b all divided by 2, where a and b are our two endpoints. We're going to find the average of -4 and +2. So when I add -4 and 2, I get -2, and when I divide that by 2, I get -1. So the halfway point or midpoint between -4 and 2 is -1. And if you look up here at our picture, -1 is definitely halfway between -4 and +2. Now finding the midpoint on a coordinate plane is not quite as straightforward. It's really close, and actually it's very simple, but this is on a diagonal and you can't really count it out, right? So finding the midpoint on a coordinate plane, we basically are going to take the x values and find their average. We're going to take the y values and find their average, and that's going to give us the middle of both. So our 2 points, we call our first point x1 and y1 because this is our first x value and our first y value. We call the second point x2 and y2 because this is our second x value and our second y value. It's not going to matter which one you use as your first point and which one you use as your second point. You'll get the same answer either way. But for now, let's take those two x values, 8 and 2, and find their average, and the two y values, 6 and -4, and do the same. The average of 8 and 2, when I add those together, I get 10, and we're going to divide by 2. And the average of our y value is 6 and -4. When we add those together, we get 2, and we're going to divide that by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So my midpoint is going to be at the point 5, 1. Average the x's, average the y's. And if you look back at our graph, that midpoint or halfway point is definitely at 5, 1. Okay, now it's your turn to try. Use your notes and pause the video so you actually have time to do this. But I want you to find the midpoint of the segment AB. This is the symbol for segment, where A and B are endpoints, where A is a -3 and B is a +7. Ready, set, go. Like I said, pause the video so you'll have time. If you got 2, give yourself a hand. You're doing great. -3 + 7 is 4. Divided by 2 is 2. Should be really short and straightforward, especially when you're on a number line. Now do the same thing. Pause the video for just a second and find the midpoint between the two endpoints 2, 1 and -4, -3. Did you get 1, -1? If so, pat yourself on the back. If not, go back and watch that second example again and see if we can't figure this out. All right, 2 more quick things. First of all, sometimes you're given the midpoint and one of your endpoints, and you need to find the other endpoint. Well, we're still going to use that same midpoint formula. It's still going to be pretty straightforward. We're just putting in 2 different numbers than what we had before. Example 3 right here, C is the midpoint and A and B are endpoints of our segment. It gives us B, which is an endpoint, at 2, and C, which is our midpoint, at -3. It wants us to find A, which is our missing endpoint. Well, since -3 is our midpoint, that's going to be M, and 2 stands for B, so that's going to be B. So if I put that into my little midpoint formula, my average formula, I get -3 equals A plus 2 all over 2. To solve this, I need to find A, right? A is being added to 2, divided by 2, and it equals -3. So to go in reverse, we are going to have to multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of my denominator. On the right-hand side of my equation, those 2's are going to cancel. And on my left-hand side of the equation, 2 times -3 equals -6. Then I simply subtract 2 to both sides, and I get A is equal to -8. And the coordinate of A is at -8 on my number line. We're going to do the midpoint, or finding the missing endpoint, when we're on a coordinate grid in class, but if you want to pause the video and give it a shot, by all means go right ahead. You should get a missing endpoint of 0, 5. Let's hurry and jump on to distance, and then we'll be done for today. When I'm on a coordinate grid, finding distance sometimes is super easy, sometimes not so much, but there's the distance formula to help us out. We have used distance formula before, so this is not the beginner's video for distance formula, but let me just show you a couple quick things. If I need to find the distance between points A and B, see how they're completely horizontal from each other? That's not going to be a hard thing. I can simply walk this out or count it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a distance of 5 between A and B. We're totally good there. B and C are completely vertical, right, from each other, so I can simply count it out. I can go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The distance between B and C is 5 again. The distance between points A and C, though, when they're on a diagonal, not so easy to count it out because the diagonal on a square is not exactly 1. So we need the distance formula. We need to know, or find out, count it out, that point A is at -3, 3, and point C is at 2, -2. We're going to take those 2 point values and have them help us in our distance formula. Now we need to, again, name these x1 for my first x, x2 for my second x, y1 for my first y, and y2 for my second y. It's not going to matter which order you have your points in. It's still going to give you the same outcome. Then I'm going to take all of these values and I'm going to put them in their appropriate place in the distance formula. x2 minus x1 and y2 minus y1 in the other set of parentheses. Order of operations says I have to do what's in the parentheses first. So I'm going to take this 2, subtract a -3, and the negative 2 minus 3 in the second set of parentheses and calculate those first. 2 subtract a negative 3, the double negative becomes a positive. 2 plus 3 is 5. Negative 2 minus 3 is a negative 5. Next in our order of operations says we have to do the exponents. So we're going to square both numbers. Both 5's being squared, 5 squared and negative 5 squared, both are going to give us positive 25. So I get 25 plus 25. Addition comes next. And finally I need to do the square root. The square root of 50 rounded to 2 decimal places is 7.07. And that's my approximate distance between the 2 points. Distance formula can become extremely helpful, especially when you're looking at maps and bigger areas like from city to city or whatever you need to find distance for. If I need to find the distance between the pirate ship and the skull, right? I've got the pirate ship and the skull up here. It's not a straight vertical shot, so I can break this up into a grid and use distance formula to help me solve. So if I count this point down in the bottom corner as 0, 0, the ship is at point 1, 1, and the skull is at point 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the point 2, 6. I can plug those into my distance formula and find that I have a distance of 5.1. Same thing if I need to find the distance between the ship and the treasure, right? That's on a diagonal. I can't just count that distance out. So I need to use distance formula to help me find my distance of 9.2. And same thing between the ship and the swords. I need distance formula because that is not a nice even distance. If you have more questions on distance formula, let's take care of those in class. Make sure to bring me any of your questions about midpoints, and I will see you soon. Hope your day is fantastic.